Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, and I wish to introduce you to the factions and forces of the Warhammer 40k universe. Today, let us discuss the most dangerous of all of the hives of the Great Devourer, the Tyranids. But please do bear in mind that this is an introduction only. I will go into greater depths on the Tyranids in general, and Hive Fleet Leviathan in specific, as time permits. So, let us begin. Hive Fleet Leviathan is by far the largest, most tactically and strategically savvy, and the most biologically powerful of all of the Hive Fleets yet to arrive in the Milky Way galaxy. Leviathan's onward rush has clearly shown the unfathomable danger of the swarms to the entire galaxy, which they now invade. The threat is so dire, so intense, so real, that once implacable enemies will need forge alliances if they wish to even hope to survive. So great a threat that even the silent king of the Necrons, that ancient army of soulless killers who despise everything and anyone who draws breath, even he has come back from his abdication to lead his race and to forge accords with the other inhabitants of the galaxy, all to the one point: the resistance of the Great Devourer, the Tyranids. Now, let us lean on existing wisdom before we get to the heart of the matter. To quote, Hive Fleet Leviathan. At the close of the 41st millennium, the largest and greatest of the Tyranid hive fleets descended upon the galaxy. The hive mind had learnt well the lessons of its earlier invasions, and this new fleet, Leviathan, employed these teachings to the detriment of all other life it encountered. Once again, it was Inquisitor Cryptman who alerted the High Lords of Terror to the new Tyranid hive fleet, one of terrible size that he named Leviathan. With the other hive fleets had attacked the eastern fringe, striking the galaxy edge on as they emerged from the intergalactic void, this new hive fleet appeared to have skirted the galactic rim and was now attacking upwards through the galactic plane. As with Kraken before, Leviathan did not focus its forces into a singular killing blow, but attacked across a broad front. Leviathan's tendrils stretched across the segmentums Ultima, Tempestus, and even Solar. By the time Inquisitor Cryptman could raise the alarm, Leviathan had already advanced far, and the shadow in the warp that heralded its coming had orphaned dozens of worlds. The worlds of Valador and St. Capilane had already been lost. The forge world of Gryphon IV, home of the mighty War Griffon's Titan Legion, had fallen ominously silent, and the agri-world of Tarsis Ultra was embroiled in a bloody battle for survival. The morale of the Imperium's forces began to plunge as more worlds were consumed, and with every planet devoured, Leviathan grew stronger. With a grim finality, Inquisitor Cryptman ordered that a galactic cordon be established. His plan was that a band of worlds should be evacuated across the path of Leviathan's main advance, with many of them razed to the ground in order to deny the Hive Fleet any further raw materials for its ships. This would slow its advance long enough for battle fleets Solar and Tempestus to muster. Any worlds already under invasion within the bounds of this cordon would undergo exterminatus, just at the point when the Tyranids descended to feed upon the doomed populace. Cryptman theorized that using this method, the swarms would expend great resources to claim a world, only to have every living thing upon it reduced to ash by barrages of cyclonic torpedoes and virus bombs. With one stark and callous decision, Cryptman had condemned billions of souls to extermination. To this day, it remains the single largest act of genocide ever inflicted upon the Imperium by its own forces since the Horus Heresy. Krypton's decision to abandon hundreds of Imperial worlds in the face of the alien advance was met by howls of outrage by his peers. This butcher's bill was deemed intolerable, and many influential inquisitors called for Krypton to be declared excommunicate traitores. When dozens of the cleansed worlds were claimed by the ever-expanding Orks of Octarius, Krypton's detractors cursed him for a radical, a traitor, and a fool. A Carta Extremis was issued, stripping Krypton of his title and forcing him into exile as a criminal of the worst kind. However, the fact remained that the inexorable advance of Leviathan had slowed to a crawl. Krypton had bought the Imperium time, that most valuable of commodities, at the expense of 100 worlds. He had resolved that the many lives he had sacrificed would not be lost in vain, and had put into action a plan aimed not merely at slowing the advance of Hive Fleet Leviathan, but at dealing it a fatal blow. Despite being cast out of the Inquisition, Krypton could not abandon his fight against the hive mind. As Leviathan continued to spread its tendrils into the Imperium, he took it upon himself to harness the power of the swarm. The former Inquisitor claimed that he could not only defeat Leviathan, but in doing so, he could rid the Imperium of the galaxy's native enemies. Though many of his few remaining allies labelled him a reckless menace, it could not be denied that he understood the Tyranids as no other did. But as the Imperium would learn, understanding an enemy such as the Tyranids and controlling it are two equally impossible things. Determined to provide his theories right, Krypton planned to use a tendril of Leviathan to eliminate the Ork Empire of Octarius. The Imperium had long been embroiled in an ever-escalating war against the Orks in this region of space, and despite huge influxes of reinforcements, resources that Krypton deemed would have been better served fighting the Tyranids. The Orks were dominating the war. Krypton's gamble was to change the balance of power forever. Enlisting aid from a squad of Death Watch space marines who still had faith in him, Krypton captured a live brood of gene stealers and then loaded them onto Perdition's Flame, a space hulk that had emerged from warp space ahead of the approaching Hive Fleet. As the Tyranids awoke from stasis, Krypton destroyed the moon of Geist, and in doing so diverted the hulk's trajectory towards the Orks. Within weeks, the Tyranid infestation had spread to dozens of worlds. The hive mind had sampled a new feeding ground, and in response, a tendril of Leviathan veered towards Octarius. At first, it appeared that Krypton's gamble had succeeded. As Tyranids and Orks fought an endless war across the sector, the Imperium was content to let the aliens' forces wipe each other out. However, both Orks and Tyranids are races that thrive on war. Greenskins flocked to join the war from light years around, and every Ork devoured provided yet more biomass to feed the growing Tyranid swarm. It soon became apparent that Krypton had only delayed the inevitable, for whichever aliens emerged from the conflict as victors would do so stronger than ever before. The Leviathan. The ultimate evolution. The Leviathan is the greatest Tyranid threat to assail the galaxy thus far, the largest and most fearsome hive fleet ever recorded. So vast is its reach that seemingly no corner of the Imperium is safe, and with every passing year it thrusts more and more tendrils through the void, devouring entire sectors and civilizations, adding to its prodigious stocks of biomass. Yet it is not merely the size of the Leviathan that makes it such a formidable threat, but the accumulated lessons that the hive mind has learned, bolstered by every previous Tyranid incursion into the galaxy. There are few foes that can surprise the hive fleet, few tactics that will take it unaware, for the Tyranids have encountered them all. Leviathan's synaptic network is also more sophisticated than those of previous incursions, allowing the hive mind to conduct uncannily coordinated combined assaults on land and from the skies. Attacking simultaneously on all fronts, with every organic tool at the hive mind's disposal, Leviathan chokes and crushes the life from its prey before feasting on the ruined remains. The sheer scale of the advancing hive fleet poses another dilemma for its targets. Where Leviathan approaches, the shadow in the warp is magnified, and its reach extended, for the Hive Fleet's synaptic network is far stronger than that of any other Tyranid host. The Imperium has suffered greatly due to this phenomenon, as communication is broken across vast swathes of its territory. When Hive Fleet Leviathan's super swarms enter the battlefield, broods of zoanthropes and towering maleceptor organisms ensure that its nullifying aura stretch far indeed, smothering the latent abilities of any psychers who are sent against it and leaving its prey isolated and terrified. The War in Octarius. Cribman had lured Hive Fleet Leviathan into Ork-held Octarius sector in the hope that the two alien species would annihilate each other. Where another race would have been terrified at the approaching swarm, the Orks were jubilant. After all, they live for a good fight. Only time would tell if the warlike creatures had finally met their match. The first world of the Octarius sector to feel Leviathan's hunger was Orok. Above the Orks' settlements, thunder rumbled and the skies turned from blue to black as bioships entered orbit. Weird boy psychers began to gibber in fear. Something was crawling at the back of their brains, something with an infinite hunger focused upon the Orks like the eye of a starving predator. Then the storm broke. Millions of warrior organisms swarmed across Orok. To the Ork mind, the best form of defense is to beat the enemy to death, so it was not long before a tide of greenskins crashed headlong into the oncoming Tyranid swarm. Thousands of aliens of both races died in a matter of seconds as blades and fangs sank home. All semblance of strategy was lost, replaced by blind fury. But the Orks' enthusiasm for war could not defeat the Tyranids' overwhelming numbers. By nightfall, every single greenskin on Orok was dead. Their bodies reconstituted and channeled back into the orbiting bioships to create yet more Tyranids. Death had come to the Octarius sector. Dozens of worlds were soon crawling with Tyranids, and every time the skies darkened, the Orks' planet side would give a great roar of delight, slapping each other on the back and grinning fiercely, as for once the fight came to them. The greatest battles centered on the planet of Octaria itself, the heart of the Ork Empire. Billions of Orks and Tyranids clashed over Octaria's mountainous terrain, both forces sending a near-constant stream of reinforcements into a grinding war of attrition. The ground underfoot turned into a crimson mulch of spilt blood and alien ichor. It was total, unremitting, endless violence, and the Orks loved it. The battle for Octarius continued to escalate, and neither side had a shortage of numbers. Orks streamed in from distant sectors to join the fight of the century, and Tyranid bioships produced fresh waves of warriors as quickly as they could assimilate biomass. So it was that as the war on Octaria raged, Leviathan was forced to seek out nearby prey worlds whose biomass could be fed into the meat grinder. In their search, a handful of Leviathan's scout ships happened across the world of Gorala, a planet rich in biomass and base of Scarfang, pirate warboss of the dread Scar Fleet. This mighty, if ramshackle armada fell upon the bioships before they could react. The Tyranid fleet was all but destroyed under Scarfang's guns. However, amongst the carnage, a single bioship broke through the Ork blockade, pouncing on the planet as a starving man might snatch at a scrap of bread. Alien blood and viscera spilt into the vacuum of space, but in its death throes the bioship delivered several broods of Tyranids to the world's surface. Scarfang grew glum as he realized the battle was over, and he resolved to join the fight on Octaria, as the few Tyranids that had made planetfall were soon stomped out. For the first time since the Tyranids had invaded the Octarius sector, they found themselves embroiled in a war where they were vastly outnumbered by their prey. Scarfang's horde was mighty, and somehow the Tyranids sensed a war of attrition would only end in their demise. In response, the Gorala swarm adapted in order to survive. At first, the Tyranids stalked and preyed upon isolated Ork patrols, but the greenskins soon took to scouring the landscape in mobs too large for the fledgling swarm to face. Forced to abandon their guerrilla war, the Tyranids adopted an altogether more cunning strategy and engaged the Orks in the open. The Tyranids attacked without thought of survival, every action aimed at maximizing the carnage. Despite the Tyranids' frenzied attacks, the Orks' superior numbers gave them the advantage in these brutal skirmishes. Whenever the Tyranids were on the verge of being overrun, they would, in eerie unison, switch from hyperactive slaughter to hasty retreat. The Tyranids lurked in nearby cavern complexes, or else burrowed beneath the soil to shelter from pursuant search parties. In the dead of night, Synapse creatures remustered the scattered swarms of the corpse-choked battlefield. There the Tyranids fed on Ork cadavers and Tyranid carcasses alike, before returning to digestion pools secreted in the planet's rocky messes. Slowly but surely the Tyranids' numbers started to grow. As the Tyranid forces swelled, they changed their methodology yet again, growing more aggressive and seeking out larger concentrations of Orks. The Tyranids' reward for their victories were ever-increasing masses of bio-resources. The increased violence soon attracted the bored Scarfang to the surface to join the fray. Wherever Scarfang's guttural war cry was heard, the Orks attacked with renewed vigour. Even when the Tyranids looked to be on the cusp of victory, the warboss was able to turn the tide. Bellowing blood-curdling threats that encouraged the boys to get stuck back in. The Tyranids were being pushed back by the resurgent Ork front. Slowly the swarm was being trampled to death. Despite the Tyranids' earlier success, there was little chance that they could face a united Ork force of such magnitude and survive. While Scarfang lived, the Gorala swarm was doomed. In response, the Tyranids created lictors with the express purpose of eliminating the Ork warboss. Within days, the lictors had tracked their imminent quarry, but Scarfang's packs of squig hounds foiled all attempts to get close enough to assassinate their target. Although eternally patient, lying in wait for a chance to strike down their target was a luxury the starving swarm could ill afford, so instead they created an opportunity. Following pheromone trails, a scuttling tide of hormagaunts was thrown at the Ork lines. As the Orks roused to man their rusty barricades, Tyranid warriors willed the scuttling masses to withdraw. Scarfang's frustration rose to infuriation as the Tyranids repeated these feints, approaching from different directions to within an arm's length, then withdrawing before the Orks could retaliate. On the 10th such retreat, Scarfang's temper could take no more. With a roar, the Ork warboss ordered his mobs to pursue their retreating swarms. Soon, black smoke was belching skyward as battle wagons and trucks rumbled after the swarm. The Tyranids had succeeded in goading the warboss, separating him from the bulk of his forces and luring him into an ambush. The Tyranids had spawned broods of venomthropes to blanket the greenskins in a thick, toxic fog. As the Orks pursued their quarry, they rode headlong into the sudden blinding mist. The entire convoy ground to a halt as vehicles skidded into rocky outcrops or else lost control and ploughed into each other. Coughing and hacking, those Orks that hadn't choked on their own blood pulled themselves from the wreckage. Scarfang himself stumbled across the battlefield and happened across the tentacled warbeast responsible for creating the noxious cloud. As he vented his anger on the venomous creatures, the fog receded and the eviscerated corpses of Orks surrounded the warboss. Lictors had stalked through the blinding cloud and dispatched the unwary greenskins one at a time until only Scarfang remained. The lictors closed on their true quarry, surrounding the warboss in deathly silence. Revving his chain blade into life, Scarfang charged the nearest with a roar of defiance. He managed 2 steps before a dozen mantis-like claws pierced his form and tore him asunder. With Scarfang dead, it was not long before vying Ork warbosses started fighting amongst themselves to fill the power vacuum. The Orks were soon divided, and the disparate bands became easy prey to the united Tyranid swarm. Each was isolated and destroyed in quick succession. Within days, the Orks of Gorala had been slaughtered like cattle. The Tyranids gorged themselves on their flesh. From the digested remains of Gorala, the swarm created new bioships and set forth to rejoin the Hive Fleet at Octaria, the biomass it had consumed destined to fuel the next phase of planetary invasion. Though the war for Octaria rages still, one thing is already clear. Despite the machinations of Cripman and the ferocity of the Orks, Leviathan shows no signs of stopping. The Tyranids are not only surviving the Octarian War, they are thriving in it. Indeed, the vast quantities of biomass that the war has generated are already being put to use by the hive mind. Having already consumed the resources necessary to power its inexorable push towards the galactic core, Leviathan has begun to leave prey worlds behind for the next wave of the Tyranid invasion to consume. These pre-digested planets provide essential feeding grounds for nascent hive fleets such as Hydra and Kronos. Even worse for the galaxy's warring races, tendrils of formidable Octarian Tyranids spawned from the most potent Ork biomass are beginning to detach from the main host and push into new territories. End quote. This recounting is from the existing wisdom and existing lore, but there is so much more. In recent releases, Gazgul Mag Uruk Thraka, the prophet of the Ork gods, Gork and Mork, has arrived at the Octarius War. His intervention and presence could lead to the escalation of the confrontation, but it has definitely swung it from an inevitable Tyranid victory into a tight-run thing. Both sides will seem to benefit from it at start, but the Orks at Octarius may well be teetering on the verge of a thing that has not happened for over 20 million years. They may reclaim their birthright and finally return to their ultimate state to evolve back into Krork. But even so, Leviathan is gaining fundamentally important DNA and experience in this war. Their tactics and strategy improving exponentially, and the beasts of war being improved by the hour. If the Orks should fail, then the Tyranids that come out of this war will be augmented to a level that may well be unstoppable, should even the Silent King, Tau, the Imperium and the Eldari entire all make common cause. If anything, this one confrontation could well decide the fate of the entire galaxy. Now, I must conclude this entry, but do know that a future video will cover the other, most interesting and entrancing of the wars that Hive Fleet Leviathan now wages, that of the assault of Imperium Nihilus and their confrontation with the Blood Angels. Gentle listener, I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. If you have enjoyed my introduction to Hive Fleet Leviathan, do consider liking and subscribing. If you do so, then please do also consider hitting the notifications button. I would not wish you to miss out. If you are a regular gentle listener and see worth in what we are doing, then please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Now, please, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.